Thank you very much. I know that I'm between you and the coffee break. I'm sorry for this. I also know that and thanks really a lot, Albino, for this brilliant paper. You know, we had thousands of telephone calls and we decided that he is doing, you know, all the good stuff and I'm the number crunching, you know, here person who shows us the data, which probably don't tell much. Well, more seriously, what he has shown really calls for good empirical research. It calls for research which is not just national and not just on small qualitative basis research, but big quantitative data which can compare countries and which finally lead to good practice solution, which then can be adopted by other countries. This we do not have. And this in itself, I think it's a very important result, because if you look at sort of diversity by gender or diversity by nationality or diversity by age, you have thousands of cross-national research, but we do not have this on disability. So disability is ignored, and I think this is a first lesson we have to gain from what I have to say. The data we have are purely descriptive data, and they are deficient data on many different respects. And so all I could do to follow up your brilliant talk by the numbers I found, you know, trying to tell you a little bit about this employment gap, are numbers by the OECD, which were gained in 2022. Well, it worked for you, it will work for me as well, but how did you do this? Which second one? What? Yeah, but oh, you can't read it, but you do not have to read it. You also have to look at this picture, because before I can move to the gap in employment by disability, I thought I should show you the percentage of people who are disabled, looking at a couple of OECD nations. Disregard the red, doesn't mean anything for the moment. And amazingly enough, you see huge differences in the percentage of disabled people by nation. I mean, this obviously calls for an explanation. How can it be that Korea has only 2.5% disabled people, while Latvia or Finland has 24% of disabled people? I mean, this is quite something, and of course there are a couple of answers. The first answer is that we do not have the entire age range. So we say, right-centered and left-centered data. You do not have people below the age of 15. You do not have people above the age of 65. So you only have 15 to 65-old people. Second, the different countries use different definitions of what disability means. So, I mean, it's sort of an artifact which derives from different definitions. But even countries which use the same definition, like European countries, show hugely different percentages in disemployment, disability. And this, I think, comes about that you have a social construction of what disability means, which leads to people answering this question, do you feel disabled, quite differently. So in one country, you may say, well, I'm disabled because I wear glasses or I have hearing problems. In another country, you would say, well, no, I do not feel disabled at all. So this is another thing, that those numbers are pure artifact, because it's not just the definition, it's also the way how people deal with the definition and consider themselves as being disabled or not. And probably a third factor is that in some countries, once you say that you are disabled, you are open for state subsidies or alimentation and things like this. So in others, you aren't. So in conclusion, I don't think that those numbers really tell you a lot, but it also is a call for more harmonized data, and data which not only asks for self-assessment, but also for administrative data, which are available in all those countries, but which are not used here. Now, underneath those aggregate data, of course, you know, we have some breakdowns according to gender and education and also, of course, age. And this is what you can see. There are not huge differences between men and women, but there are huge differences according to age. And this is something which we have noticed before. You see that young people have, and the young people are the lowest bars. This is the age group between, those are not children, but this is the age group between 15 and 29 years of age. This is the lowest rate of a disability, which means that the older you get, up to the age of 69, where the data, and afterwards the data are not available, the more disabilities you see that, or you state that you have and suffer. And this, of course, brings us to the moment of prevention, because all those diseases are acquired during the life course. Most of them are during the life course. And I work very, very closely with a couple of health systems, and I work closely with cohorts of medical doctors and of course people who are working in hospitals. And you can see that those people working in hospitals, in particular nurses, probably survive in their jobs for 25 years or 30 years at a maximum. And otherwise, and afterwards, they are simply exhausted. And they are asking for early retirement due to disability. And another group of persons I also work with very closely are people who are working in the cleaning sector, in particular doing, you know, a hard job of cleaning cities and things like that. They can't work in this job for more than 20 years because they are just physically exhausted. And they are also called in early retirement and on grounds of disability. So there's a lot we can do to decrease this huge difference between disability at the age of 15 to 29 and 50 to 69. The third one, the third panel is on education. And here, of course, we have to be very clear that causality is not given here. I mean, we know that people who are disabled have less chances to get in the educational system. But we also know that it can be vice versa, that people with a low education are much more at risk to become disabled. So those, we can't say a lot, but we know that we can better the lives of disabled people in the educational system, and that when the causality is the other way around, we indeed have to do much more to decrease educational poverty, as I call it. So getting more than a minimum education for people. This having been said, I move now to early school leavers, and you know that in the transition from school to work, those people who do not have certificates, those are early school leavers, or people with not even minimal competencies have a very, very hard life getting into employment. In the range of those people with no school certificates, in particular people with serious disabilities, is huge. You can see how the school system differentiates between people with moderate disability and with people with a very strong and severe disability. And some school systems seem to do very, very well, like the United States, amazingly. They say, well, I mean, we have sort of no early school leavers with moderate or with severe disability. This, I mean, those data you seriously can't trust. but at least, I mean, this is what they state in those OECD data, while Spain, you know, has a huge difference, or Germany as well, with people without disability being very low in the risk of having no leaving certificates, and people with severe disability are at a very, very high risk to be left at the labor market and have a very, very hard time getting into those positions. The same can be said with those people who are not in employment, in education or training, the so-called needs. You see how big the differences are in one educational system or one transition system compared to other nations where differences between people with a strong disability and only with a modest disability are very, very tiny, which is amazing, actually. So you wonder how those school systems do, or how those transitional labor markets do. Now we finally add, and this is a lower thing, the lower panel on what we are heading at, the employment rate or the employment gap of people with and without disabilities. And you see that the employment gap is considerable. It varies again between nations, but what we see now is that in the United States, for example, you have a huge gap. Also, you did not have a gap at all in the education system. So in the educational system, severely disabled people came out as well as no disability people, and no in the employment. It's just the other way around. The difference is huge. Quite different from our usual hypothesis that people in the knowledge, it's much more than a hypothesis, a knowledge that people signal with their educational certificate whether or not they do well in the labor market and ease in the transition from school to work. This is not the case for disabled people. So in some nations, they indeed get a school leaving certificate, but the use of this school leaving certificate is like zero, because they can't do anything with this certificate in terms of getting into the labor market, which is a problem, actually. And we do not know whether this is discrimination or whether they have to do entry tests or whatever, but at least we cannot trust educational certificates, which is a learning which I took out of this data, given that we do not have representative good research on the transition between school to work of disabled people. Now, it's not just that we find this gap in employment, we also find considerable gaps in terms of salaries. So even if people find employment who are disabled, they do not earn the same money as non-disabled people earn. And we also know that the time they are in one job is not as long as the average person who is in a job. So they have to change jobs much more often, and the labor market stability is quite low. Also, the unemployment rate of disabled people is extremely high. And this is not made up by state subsidies or by state transfers, which then means that the ratio in disposable household income between people with disability and without disability is quite tremendous, even if you take those state subsidies into account. And this then, of course, leads to the final table here, which shows that the poverty rate of disabled people is much, much higher compared to people without disability. This, given all those figures which I showed before, doesn't come to a surprise at all. So it's disability, it's poverty in education, it's not that educational certificates seem to signal something to the employers, it's discrimination in the labor market, unequal pay, it's unequal stability in the labor market, and it's early exit of the labor market, and it's that if you add the salary with state transfers, that you do not match the average income of a household without disability. So you have a myriad of different exclusionary practices. I would like to sort of give you a glimpse in the German situation, which shows you another problem. Like Germany is doing sort of well in a way. Germany has always in the middle of the distribution. I mean, this is not, it's always the case. Germany is sort of not good, it's not bad. But if you have a closer look at Germany, you see that Germany includes people in the school system and in the employment sector without including those people, because they have different schools for people which are disabled and people who are not disabled. And we recently did a study, and we first looked at the differences in the perceptions. There's a possibility of sort of realizing what task you are getting, and you see the blue lines and the blue curves are those children who are asked to go to a special school, and the green curve are those people who are now, the blue one is a normal school and the green is a special school. So you see that there is a lot of overlap in whatever you call it, you know, in the intelligence of people or in the competencies of people. Those are not two different, they are much more similar in terms of their cognitive abilities than we would have thought of. But if you now compare those young kids, people, now I'm talking indeed about children aged 40 and 50, which go to the special schools, 90% of them do not receive a school leaving certificate. But if those people go to a normal school, 90% receive a school certificate. So schooling really matters. And if you are in an inclusive schooling, you are much, much better in terms of your advancement in a cognitive way, but also we learned that discrimination is much lower, that the people who are disabled can, you know, sort of socialize much, much better with non-disabled people, as well as the other way around, that non-disabled people recognize disabled people in quite a different way, and they include it. So the German system, holding system, is inclusion in terms they get some schooling. Yes, they are not entirely excluded from schooling, but it's a separate school system. In most of the countries, also, we signed the Anti-Discrimination Act in 2009. And this exclusion in schools is followed by an exclusion in the labor market, because we have the so-called Behindertenwerkstätten. Those are entirely separate labor markets. There are actually no labor markets at all, where people have to work, but with a very, very low salary only. And they are also included in the labor market, in labor, so they have paid work, if you want to put it like this, without being included in the labor market. And therefore, this is the next problem when we face OECD data, which I have shown you first, because you really do not know what's behind it. Because those people in Germany, both in school and in employment, are counted as being at school and being at the labor market. So in summary, this is really a plea for doing more research on the integration of disabled people along actually your hypotheses, which are brilliantly to test. Second, we have to really sort of get at least the OECD to raise better data, not just self-assessment, but also administrative data, which I think would be worthwhile over the entire age and not cutting off children and older people. And in terms of policy, we have to do much, much, much more in terms of prevention, because most of those people can be helped early so that they are not getting disabled. Thank you very much.